Hello, everyone. I'm Don Lemon, live at the CNN World Headquarters in Atlanta. You're looking at that picture of Whitney Houston, and it does say 1963 to 2012 because CNN has confirmed that Whitney Houston has died at the age of 48. Beverly Hills Police Department Lieutenant Mark Rosen coming out and confirming that information in a live.
I was reading through the Sony catalog filings last month, looking at how the company values its 2025 acquisitions, and I kept coming back to one line item: Whitney Houston's master recordings. Sold over 220 million records. Generated by my own estimate, cross-referenced against Arista's reported revenue from the era, somewhere north of $500 million in label-side profit across 40 years. And yet the woman who sang those records died in February 2012, owing the same label $20 million. I want to be clear about something before we go any further. This is not a story about Whitney Houston losing her money. This is not a tragedy script about cocaine and Bobby Brown and bad decisions. There are 100 of those on YouTube already. What I am about to walk you through is something I think is more important and almost never gets explained properly. I am calling it the recoupment trap. It is a contract structure that by design allows a record label to legally bankrupt its own biggest stars while collecting 9 figures off their voices. Whitney Houston is not the only artist this happened to. She is just the cleanest case study, and the reason it matters in 2026 is that the same trap, dressed up in different clothes, is being signed today by every teenager who walks into a major label conference room thinking the headline number on the contract is the deal. It is not. So let me show you what the deal actually was. To understand how the trap closes, you have to understand what was being offered. Cissy Houston was a backup singer. Her cousin was Dionne Warwick. Her goddaughter was Aretha Franklin. The Houston family lived inside the music business but did not own a single piece of it, and that distinction, owning versus being employed by, is the entire story of this video. In 1983, Clive Davis, the founder of Arista Records, walked into a Manhattan club called Sweetwater's, watched a 19-year-old Whitney sing 2 songs, and signed her on the spot. The headline that night was a roughly $250,000 advance, full creative direction, and album budgets that dwarfed what other new artists were being offered. By the standards of 1983, that was a generous deal. By the standards of what was about to happen, it was the bargain of the century. But I want you to notice the word advance, because that single word is doing more work in this contract than any other. An advance is not a payment, an advance is a loan, and the moment Whitney signed, she was already in debt. Most people I talk to assume a record deal works the way every other contract works. The artist makes a thing, the label sells the thing, the artist gets paid for each copy sold. That is not how it works. Not in 1983, not in 2026. The structure is called recoupment, and here is the mechanic in plain English. The label gives the artist money up front. That money pays for studio time, producers, engineers, mixers, music videos, photo shoots, marketing, tour support, the artist's living expenses, lawyers, accountants, hair, wardrobe, everything. Every single one of those expenses gets logged against the artist's royalty account as a debt. Then, when the album is released, the label collects revenue from every sale. But before the artist sees $1 of royalty, the label takes its money back first. Every dollar of advance has to be recouped from the artist's share of sales, not the label's. Only after the advance is fully recouped does the artist start earning. And here's the part that almost nobody outside the industry knows. The artist's royalty rate on a deal like Whitney's is typically 12 to 15% of wholesale, sometimes lower. The label keeps the other 85+%. So if the label gave the artist a $1 million advance, the artist has to generate roughly $7 to $8 million in revenue before they earn 1 cent of profit. Now layer on a term you will only hear in a lawyer's office called cross-collateralization. That is the clause that says debts from a flop album can be pulled forward into the recoupment account of the next album. You can have a hit album, sell 10 million copies, and still owe the label money because the previous record bombed. The debt does not reset. The debt follows you. Knowing that, look at what happens next. February 1985, Whitney's debut album drops, saving All My Love for You, How Will I Know, Greatest Love of All. 14 weeks at #1 on the Billboard 200, 25 million copies sold worldwide. The best-selling debut album by a solo artist in history at that time. The press calls her a multimillionaire, but here's the gap between the press release and the ledger. At a 15% artist royalty rate against a wholesale price of around $6 per cassette, set in 1986. 25 million copies generates roughly $22 million of artist-side revenue. Subtract recoupment for the album budget, the music videos at $500,000 apiece, the marketing campaign, the tour support, the prior advance balance. Subtract management commissions, typically 15 to 20% off the top. Subtract her lawyer's points, her accountant's points, the standard producer points the label deducted from her side of the deal. By the time you reach Whitney's actual take-home, you are looking at a fraction of what the headline suggested. And remember, every dollar she had not yet recouped was still active debt against her next album. The hit was not making her rich, the hit was lowering an existing balance. Which brings me to the part of this story that I think is the most important and the most overlooked. Because if record-breaking sales were not freeing Whitney from debt, then something deeper was happening to the actual asset she was creating. Every recorded song contains two separate copyrights. One is the composition, the lyrics and melody, owned by the songwriter. The other is the master recording, the specific performance captured on tape, owned by whoever paid for the session. In nearly every major label deal of Whitney's era, the label paid for the session, so the label owned the master, in perpetuity, forever. And here is the thing that gets me about Whitney's case specifically. She did not write her hits. Greatest Love of All was written by Linda Creed and Michael Masser. I Will Always Love You was written by Dolly Parton in 1973, so Whitney owned no composition copyright on her biggest songs, and she owned no master recording copyright on her own performance, which meant every time her voice played on the radio, every time the song appeared in a movie, every time someone bought the soundtrack, the label collected on the master, and the songwriter collected on the composition, and Whitney collected an artist royalty against an unrecouped balance, which mathematically meant she collected nothing. To put a number on what those masters are worth in 2026, look at this. In 2019, the catalog investment company Primary Wave bought a 50% stake in Whitney's estate, including her name and likeness and her side of the royalty stream, for an estimated $14 to $20 million. That values the artist side estate at roughly $30 to $40 million. The masters, owned by Sony, which absorbed Arista in 2008, have been valued by industry analysts at over $200 million. The artist's heirs own a slice. The label owns the asset. Now I want to pause here because I have seen some of you in the comments on previous videos saying that Taylor Swift fixed all of this by re-recording her albums, and I get why people say that. In May 2025, Taylor Swift bought back her original masters from Shamrock Capital for a reported $360 million, ending a 6-year public fight that started when Scooter Braun acquired Big Machine in 2019. I covered that on this channel, but I want to be honest with you. For Whitney in the 1990s, the Taylor Swift solution was not a legal possibility, and even today it is not a solution available to most artists. Here is why. Taylor's contract had what lawyers call a re-record restriction window, which expired and let her cut new versions. Most major label contracts now include a re-record restriction of 10 to 30 years, specifically because the industry watched what Taylor did and rewrote the boilerplate to prevent it. Salt and Peppa tried something different in 2025, suing Universal Music Group to invoke their 35-year termination rights to take back their masters. They lost. The federal court ruled the fine print of their original 1980s deal blocked the termination claim. There was also a Louisiana federal ruling in January 2025 that, for the first time, extended termination rights globally beyond the United States, but that case is on appeal, and music industry attorneys are warning it could be reversed. So when people tell you Taylor Swift solved the masters problem, what they actually mean is this. One of the wealthiest pop stars in history, with the largest fan army on the planet, was able to spend $360 million of her own money to buy back what she should have owned in the first place. That is not a fix, that is a ransom payment. And for everyone below Taylor's leverage tier, including most of the artists currently topping the charts in 2026, that path simply does not exist, which is exactly what happened to Whitney when she tried her version of a fresh start. By 2001, after 7 studio albums, the cultural shift, the Bobby Brown marriage, the tabloid years, Whitney was reportedly burning through 6 figures a month and her commercial momentum had stalled. So Arista handed her what was, at the time, the largest deal in label history, $100 million, 6 new albums, 2 greatest hits compilations. The headline circled the globe. It was supposed to be a comeback. Here is what the headline did not say. $100 million deal is not $100 million payment. It is is a ceiling. In industry terminology, what Arista signed was a multi-album option deal with delivery conditional advance triggers. Each album generates a separate advance, paid in installments, conditioned on delivery, marketing benchmarks, and sales recoupment thresholds. If the albums underperform, the back-end advances get reduced or never paid. According to multiple industry reports cited by The Daily and Idolator, after her death, Whitney only ever collected approximately $40 million of the headline $100 million. Her 2002 album Just Whitney sold roughly 3 million copies worldwide. Her 2009 album I Look to You sold around 2.5 million. Compare that to her earlier albums, which routinely cleared 10 to 25 million units. The 2000s records were considered commercial disappointments, which meant the advances she had already taken were not being recouped by sales, which meant her royalty account at Sony was running deeper into the red with every passing year. By the time she died, she owed the label, by the most credible estimates, at least $20 million. And because of cross-collateralization, that debt was not isolated to one album. It was lashed to her entire catalog. Her family would not see a single royalty check, according to Bloomberg-cited reporting at the time, until the catalog generated enough sales to clear the balance. Then she died, and the strangest part of this entire story happened. Whitney Houston drowned in a Beverly Hills bathtub on February 11, 2012, the night before the Grammy Awards. The world reacted the way the world reacts to the death of a generational icon. Album sales spiked. Streams exploded. Within 9 months, her estate generated an estimated $40 million from the surge in posthumous catalog sales. Sony, still holding the masters, collected on its side of the same revenue. Clive Davis, the man who signed her, hosted his pre-Grammy gala at the Beverly Hilton hours after her body was removed from a room 1 floor above the venue. The party went on. Industry sources reported that the renewed interest pushed multiple Whitney albums back into the Billboard 200 simultaneously. Sony was now collecting on a catalog whose advanced debt was being paid down by streams the artist herself never lived to monetize. The $20 million debt was eventually cleared, paid out of the surge of posthumous sales. Her daughter, Bobby Christina Brown, was set to inherit the remainder. Bobby Christina died 3 years later, age 22, found unconscious in a bathtub in her Georgia home, eerily mirroring her mother's death. The inheritance passed to Whitney's mother and brothers. In 2019, Primary Wave bought half. The Vegas hologram tour launched. The biopic I Wanna Dance with Somebody came out in 2022 and grossed nearly $60 million at the box office. The MAC Cosmetics deal, the Spotify catalog, I Will Always Love You crossing 1 billion YouTube views. The estate quadrupled its earnings in the years after her death, so did the label. So here is the question I have been building toward. Has any of this actually changed in 2026? My honest answer is no, and I will tell you why. The structure has just gotten better at hiding itself. Today, the contract you sign as a new artist with a major label is rarely called a record deal anymore. It is called a 360 deal, which means the label takes a percentage of your recorded music revenue, your touring revenue, your merchandise revenue, your sync licensing, your endorsements, sometimes even your YouTube ad revenue. The math of recoupment still applies. The masters still belong to the label. Cross-collateralization is still standard, but now the recoupment account is fed by more revenue streams, which means it gets paid down faster, which means the optics of artist debt look less brutal. The trap is the same. The accounting is just smoother. Look at Billie Eilish, who is held up as a 2026 success story. She signed to Darkroom, an Interscope imprint owned by Universal Music Group in 2016 when she was 14 years old, before she had any real leverage. Her masters belong to UMG. The team around her is excellent, and the deal was reportedly favorable for someone her age. But at 14, the structure of any major label contract is, by definition, designed to favor the label. Olivia Rodrigo signed to Geffen, also UMG, before she was famous. Same dynamic. The artists who do own their masters in 2026, like Chance the Rapper or some of the independent K-pop acts, do it by refusing the major label path entirely, and they pay for that independence with smaller marketing budgets and slower global rollout. So my prediction is this: the artist who finally breaks the recoupment trap will will not be the next Taylor Swift, who buys her way out for $360 million. It will be an artist who never signs the deal in the first place, who builds the audience on YouTube or TikTok or whatever the next platform is, who never accepts an advance, who licenses distribution rather than assigning ownership. Until that person becomes a top 5 global artist on their own terms, the trap will keep closing, because the system was not built around any one record label or any one artist. The system was built around the principle that the catalog, the master recording, the actual sound of a human voice captured on tape is worth more than the human who made it. The catalog has no funeral. The catalog cannot overdose. The catalog does not get divorced or check into rehab or stop selling records because its voice is gone. The catalog just keeps generating revenue forever for whoever owns the master. Whitney Houston was the greatest voice of her generation. She sold 220 million records, made her label $500 million, and when she drowned at age 48, she did not own the recording of her own voice singing "I Will Always Love You" somewhere in a server farm under Sony Music Entertainment. That recording is playing right now, billing right now, monetizing right now, and the contract that made all of that possible was signed by a 19-year-old in a Manhattan nightclub in 1983 in a deal she was told was the bargain of her life. It was, just not for her.